Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. Now after the giant Whitby gown project with all of its silk flowers and hand sewing and beading going on, I really needed something simpler this week just to give me a little bit of a palette cleanser, a project I could start and finish within a couple of days. And last year I made a couple of cotton batik summer dresses, and I had bought one more fabric in a black and muted rainbow sort of colorway that I never got to use. So I decided to pull that fabric out of the stash and go ahead and make a simple summer dress and then a matching wrap back top with a longer peplum to be able to wear over it if I wanted to change up the look. And I really don't know how I feel about longer peplums on me or peplums on me in general, so I thought this would be a good time to go ahead and experiment with that and see if I do like them or not. I didn't used to, but maybe my opinion has changed. I am older and maybe a tiny bit wiser now, so we'll have to see how it goes. So instead of one giant costuming project, I will finally have some simple retro sewing going on. Let's go ahead and jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom and get started. I'm beginning with the all-in-one sleeve version of my bodice block today. I can go ahead and put a card up to the video where I take my regular bodice block and transform it into this all-in-one sleeved version. Basically, one of the darts disappears up into the sleeve, leaving us with a rather rectangular pattern. And in fact, the first thing I'm going to do here is straighten off this sleeve so that I really just have a little bit of a cap sleeve falling off the shoulder up here, and no additional sleeve extension past the side seam on this all-in-one pattern. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I'll be using my regular standard all-in-one sleeve for the wrap back top, and I wanted this sleeve of the dress to fit underneath that comfortably. I will go ahead and start drawing in my neckline here. I wanted to make sure that was about 3.5 inches up from my apex. I like to keep my necklines relatively high, I suppose, just because I usually wear quite full coverage bras, so it's very easy for me to make the neckline too low. And it's not that it's very uncomfortable for me or anything, it's just that my bra will show, so I have to be careful for that reason. I am going to split this waist dart into 2 waist darts today, and I just need to mark on my side seam where that sleeve was so I can know how far up to sew my side seam towards the sleeve opening so I can still have space for my arm, of course. But I will go ahead and cut this out so I can start doing my dart manipulation here. Again, I'm just going to split this dart fullness into 2 darts here at the waist instead of 1. I don't know why I felt like sewing 2 darts this day instead of 1, but apparently I just felt like doing a little bit more work. I don't know why. So I just split that dart fullness, taped everything back down, and I filled in my new dart with some paper. This is the same amount of fullness, it's just put into 2 darts instead of 1. If you haven't watched my dart video, I have a whole video all about dart fullness, so you can understand what's going on here in more detail if you'd like. And because these darts are currently all the way up to the apex, in order to do manipulation, I do need to draw in new dart legs that are 1.25 inches below the apex itself, because I don't want my darts to go all the way to the apex when I'm sewing them, otherwise I will have a very pointy Madonna situation, which is actually reasonably acceptable for the 1950s, but not so much here in 2023. And that's all I'll be doing for the front of my dress pattern today. I'll go ahead and trace a copy of my all-in-one bodice back here to use as the back of my dress. Make sure I have my 1-inch seam allowance in here, and the neckline on this block pattern is always a bit low, so I raise that up a little bit. And then again, I just need to make sure I have the same side seam sleeve situation going on here, so I'll straighten that off, draw in my dart. I won't be making any changes to the dart back here. I do want to make sure that my shoulder seam still lines up here, so I just wanted to make sure everything was in the same spot. Go ahead and mark where my original arm size starts here, like so, making sure my shoulder seam and sleeve are the same length for the front and the back, and I'll just mark on the side where the side seam needs to be as well. I will go ahead and notch that on my actual fabric, and by notch, really I mean just mark it in with colored pencil, because I never actually do fabric notches unless they're already on a pattern I'm using for some reason. I usually just mark things with colored pencil, as we know, or chalk if I'm feeling really good about it. After I've cut that out, I will go ahead and draft some simple facings for this to finish the neckline. So here's a little back facing, just tracing 2.5 inches of the back neckline to use as a facing for back here. Then I will do the same for the front to finish this front neckline with a facing as well. I do also have a video all about doing this neckline facing nonsense somewhere here on the channel. I will link it in the description below, because I'm sure to run out of cards here. But again, 2.5 inches wide, just make sure this is all encompassing. I won't be lining this dress today, it's just gonna be a simple summer dress that I can throw in the wash. This fabric I'll be using today has been pre-washed, so it's all ready to go. I really like a cotton summer dress that I can throw in the wash, of course. And I will just be using my regular pencil skirt pattern for this, my basic skirt pattern, my basic block skirt pattern that you can see me make again here on the channel if you'd like. Again, I will link that video in the description, but I'm just using my basic pencil skirt with this dress today. So that's my dress pattern sort of for today, but I'll be making 2 garments, so I need my wrap back top pattern as well. I pulled that out of its plastic baggie that it lives in down here, although it does get a lot of use. Honestly, I should just pin it up on the board behind me because I use it so often. We all know I love a wrap back top. But today I will draft a new, longer peplum for this buddy. I was thinking of a longer sort of mid-thigh, almost length peplum for this, looking at a couple of 1950s patterns as inspiration for this idea of doing a longer peplum on here. You can see a lot of these sort of longer tops with cigarette pants or pencil skirts underneath. That was kind of the idea with this top today. But I will just trace the front of my A-line skirt pattern here. Once again, you can see me make the A-line skirt pattern here on the channel as well. I will throw that one in a card for you. Right here, easy access. It's actually a fun video because I do use two different methods to make the A-line skirt pattern, and one of them is a little bit more like magic than the other. You can see I have the side seam allowance drawn in here, and I will just line that up with my back A-line skirt piece and go ahead and draw in the waistline for that as a basis to start off with. Basically, I'm making a circle skirt, or like a circle cut ruffle that's quite long as the peplum for this. So right now I have my A-line skirts sort of lined up with a wedge of fullness filling out the center between the two along the side seam. If you're watching slowly, you can kind of see what I mean by that. But really I'm just tracing my A-line skirts lined up with one another along the side seam as a basis. This looks kind of like a quarter circle right now, you'll notice. You really could use a circle skirt as a base to make a peplum like this as well. My circle skirt patterns are kind of giant, so I keep them folded up, and I don't really like having to get them out, and I like being able to control where I'm adding additional fullness and flare to something like this, so I decided to start with the A-line skirts, but obviously you could really start with a circle because it's very similar. I'm going to make this 15.5 inches long here as a starting point. I think I probably could have made this a little bit longer, but to be fair, I didn't really have enough fabric to do this peplum, so if I had made it any longer, I really would have run out because I made a bit of a cutting mistake that I'll talk about later. Just finish off that 15.5 inches here along the back, cut that out, and then I will add in a little bit of additional flare to this peplum. I'm going to draw a line down the center of the front of the pattern here and add about 3 or 4 inches in here, a wedge of fullness. Obviously this is not fit fullness, this is just extra flare for the style of it all. I want to have a little bit of extra flare along my peplum here in the front. Hopefully that'll fall in a fold around this area. You can kind of control, I mean, in the same way that if you added a pleat right here, you can control exactly where you want it. I want to add a little bit of flare right here, exactly where I want it. I'll tape down my floops along the back of that, and I will do the same here in the back. I will go ahead and split this down the middle and add in another 3 or 4 inches of fullness. Another little floop back here in the back of my skirt for a little bit more twirl factor. And again, cut off the excess, tape down my floops, Peplum 2023, in case I ever get confused. So yes, here's my fabric for today. It is this very gorgeous black and mottled rainbow kind of colored tie-dye, almost like the ice dyeing I do, batik fabric. This is a cotton batik. You can find these in the quilting section at most fabric stores. And they are a finer weave than most quilting cottons, so they behave more like a cotton poplin than a quilting cotton, so I really like using these for apparel. If all you have access to is quilting cotton, I always recommend batiks. However, batiks are a wax printing, more naturalistic sort of process, more handmade kind of process, and so when you're using them, I recommend a more organic print, because this one here is almost a geometric print, which meant the misalignment of the block printing process for the batik meant that a lot of this was a little bit off grain with the print, and cutting it out was a bit of a nightmare, so I decided to cut things out for the dress bodice on the bias. And doing that meant that I really had to piece together the rest of the nonsense, because I really didn't have enough fabric to be cutting things on the bias like that on the 45-degree angle. So I didn't cut the dress bodice on the bias for any reason other than to try and make the print match up. It wasn't a fit decision, it was just a looking at this print and trying to see what way was going to make it look least awkward with the geometric not lining up perfectly nonsense. But yes, I've decided to go ahead and construct the wrap back top today first, so I'm pinning the darts on the front of that, but you may have caught that I had to put a center front seam in the wrap back top front, and then I also had to put a center front seam in the peplum for this, which was most unfortunate. I wish I could have cut those out on the fold, but I didn't have enough fabric for that. I only had 4 yards of this to cut everything out on the fold and cut the dress bodice on the bias. I probably would have needed 5 yards instead. I'll get back to what I'm actually doing, which is again marking and pinning all of my darts for the wrap back top in both the batik fabric and then also in a black muslin that I had pre-washed to use as a lining for this wrap back top. I won't line the peplum, but I will line the top itself just because it's the easiest way to finish this style of top. But I'll take my prepped darts over to the machine and start sewing those, again starting at the large end of the dart, sewing off the tip, and then tying my threads shut, as I always do for my darts. This is just how I was taught and how I continue. And I do have many darts to sew today. But that's alright, I've sewn hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of darts in my time, and therefore they are the least intimidating thing to me. However, zippers, despite having sewn hundreds of them, I am still intimidated by them. I just feel like everything can always go wrong at a zipper. It's unfortunate. But with my darts sewn and pressed for both the fronts and backs of my wrap back top, I can line up the straight shoulder seams and the little curvy side seams for these, and sew those next. I will do that for both the outside fashion fabric here and also for the black lining. Just lining these buddies up. I didn't bother serging anything or finishing the raw edges on the bodice portion of the wrap back top just because it's going to be fully encased and all bag lined anyway, so I'm not worried about anything fraying. Take those back over the machine. I am using my black all-purpose Scooterman thread over here on the machine today as per pretty usual, and my 12 stitches per inch as again is quite usual over here. I usually use a larger stitch length like 10 or 8 stitches per inch for top stitching, and I really only use the largest stitch length on this machine for doing gathering. Although this machine does go smaller than 12 stitches per inch, and that's just minuscule, and I'm not exactly sure what that would be best practice for. If you know what to use an absolutely minuscule, like Victorian size tiny stitch length on, let me know. What is that actually for? Because it seems just to like perforate most things. But with all those seams sewn, I can take them back over to the ironing board and give them a quick press, of course. Always pressing as I go when I'm making anything. And although I'm leaving the edges raw on the inside of the top of this garment, for the peplum I do want to finish all of the edges before I go ahead and set this in, just because I'll be sandwiching this layer in between the fashion fabric and the lining when I go ahead and bag line this. So I just thought I would finish the whole peplum first before I did that. And I did have some leftover green batik bias tape from when I was making the walkaway dress earlier this summer, so I just grabbed some of that and used it to hem the curved edge of my peplum. Again, if you haven't tried using bias to hem a curved edge, you really are missing out. It's just so satisfying. I mean, it's time consuming to hand stitch this all down, but it's so worth it for the really clean finish that you get. And you can use it as a design accent as well. For example, this peplum might flap around in the wind, and it's nice to have this cleanly finished with a little bit of a contrasting color that will show on the inside. And I will use a tiny bit more of this bias tape to finish the back straight edges of my peplum as well in that same way, sewing them right sides together, turning everything to the inside, and then hand stitching it down. But with my peplum all hemmed and finished, I can go ahead and line the waist seam of the peplum up with the waist seam of the outside of my bodice of my wrap back top here. I'll go ahead and match the center seams that I didn't want to have in either of these pieces, but I'll match them up now that they're there because, you know, what can you do? Hopefully you have to be looking very closely. I tried to match them as best as I could. It worked better on the top than on the peplum, but you know, making do as best I could with only 4 yards to puzzle these pieces together. I was focusing on keeping the front bodice of both the dress and the top the most geometrically sound, so other pieces did perhaps suffer a tiny bit for that preference, if that makes sense. But I'm going to go ahead and pin the waist of my peplum and top together and baste that together, because when I lay this black lining on top of everything, right sides together, the peplum is just going to be hanging out, stuffed in between these two layers as I stitch them together. I do have to be careful that I don't pin that peplum at any point where it's not supposed to be and don't get it caught in any of this bag lining. If you've seen me make any of these wrap back tops before, which I've made 2 here on the channel and 1 over on Patreon, I think, I make a lot of these in my sewing room, so they end up getting filmed quite often. Basically, same process here as ever, just bag lining this whole thing, and then because the sleeves are open, I can pull this all out through a sleeve once it's sewn together. So sewing along one of the back wraps here up to the shoulder seam, leaving the needle down, picking the presser foot up, and turning around my corners when I need to, just how I like to get around those or navigate the situation. Same over here at the other shoulder seam, and then down the other back side of the wrap. If you were going to be taking your time doing this project or using a looser weave of fabric, it probably would be good to do stay stitching at least along the diagonal wrap cross back pattern piece just because that will be on a 45 and you want to make sure it doesn't stretch too much. But because I put this all together within a couple of hours, I wasn't worried about my fabric stretching on me because I knew it was going to be finished clothes before you could say spatula, not worried about it. I will clip my corners and curves here before I turn this right side out. Going along here, the waist seam is slightly curved, so I did put some clips in there. Again, this is all going to be encased in the lining once I turn this right side out, so I'm not worried about this fraying or anything like that. Especially, although I have pre-washed and dried this cotton fabric, both of these fabrics, I still will wash this on a delicate cycle because I don't really treat any of my clothes particularly harshly. I save harsh washing cycles for towels and sheath and stuff, But with everything turned right side out, I can now go around and sort of finger roll and press the edges just with my fingers and then solidify the situation with the iron, going around and flattening everything down. You could, of course, try and sneak some edge stitching in here, or understitching in here, or top stitch it from the outside. I have had some fabrics, like brocades, that want to be really poofy around these edges, and I have just top stitched them down because it gets lost in the texture of the brocade anyway. So depending on what your textile is, you can decide how to finish these edges. And the last steps for this wrap back top, because again, the peplum is already all hemmed, are just to go ahead and hem these sleeves by turning each layer in on itself a 1/2 inch and then pinning those together and slip stitching them like a pillow. To sew these both shut, I will just go sit over at my desk in front of my computer, put something on in the background and stitch those shut. And then of course I do need my skirt hooks or hook and eyes that I usually use to finish these as well. And my first step for the dress portion of this two-parter project thing is going to be cutting out some fusible interfacing for my facing pieces for the neckline of the bodice. Because this cotton is of a slightly lighter weight, I wanted to go ahead and interface these just to give a little bit of structure to the neckline, especially with those points in the front. They need a little bit more support to not just flop around entirely. So I'll just add a little bit of iron-on fusible to those. And then similarly to the wrap back top, I need to mark and pin some darts, of course. I will go ahead and mark how high I need my side seams to be along the side here as well, of course, so I know how far up this side seam to sew and where to leave the opening for the sleeve, basically. But I'll go ahead and mark my darts on the backs, on the fronts, and get all of these ready to sew in a sort of assembly line sort of situation over by the machine, including the skirt darts as well. I don't think I show any of that here, but just know that I had 4 darts to sew on the front of the skirt and 4 for the skirt backs. And although I'm ready for fall and Halloween season to begin in earnest, it is still 95 degrees here in Colorado and quite sunny outside, although it is rather windy today as well. So lightweight summer cotton dresses are definitely still a better option than, fall layers, which is sad because we all know how I love like a wool suit or lots of not very breathable metallic brocade. So I do prefer it to be a little bit crispier and chilly outside. I don't actually enjoy the heat much. Sometimes people get really worried about me moving to like the East Coast, like the Northeast, or like my dream location where I would want to live the most. If money was no object, I'd be figuring out how to move to Scotland. And people will say, oh, but it's just so rainy and chilly or cold all the time. And I just think, perfect. I love suits. Although, go down to the south of France so you can wear your summer dresses like these. But I'm looking forward to it being a little bit chillier outside as opposed to searing. But after I have all of my darts sewn, of course I need to press those. Here on the fronts, I press my darts towards the center front, and on the back pieces, I will press my darts towards the center back. Again, just how I was programmed, and therefore how I remain. Some people press all their darts towards the side seams. You do you, Just depends on how you drafted it over in the patterning stage. So that's what I'm doing here, prepping these pieces. I will also run all of this through the serger now because, again, this piece will not be lined. Unlike the first piece, I did that bag lining. This time, everything's just going to be exposed on the inside, so I want to make sure I run any edges that will receive any friction. I'm just going to go through my serger just to help protect them. I don't think this fabric would fray too badly anyhow, but seeing as I have the serger here, I might as well make use of it. And before I run the outside edge of the facing pieces through the serger, I will just go ahead and stick that fusible on there, iron everything into place. So the only edges I won't be running through the serger here just for a little bit of seam protection are going to be the neckline and the hem, just because those will both be finished. The neckline by the facing, and the hem I'll actually use a little bit more of that bias tape from earlier just to go ahead and finish the hem on this today. And I will serge the entire side seam slash sleeve hem, which is kind of one and the same in this. But you can see here I put a pin in where I had my colored pencil indication to show how far up I need to sew that side seam, because it is in line with the sleeve hem, if that makes any sense. Hopefully you're following along. But with all my darts sewn, everything pressed, and everything I need to have serged, I can go ahead and sew my shoulder seams and side seams as well. And I can also assemble the facing as well, just sewing together those shoulder seams, and the pencil skirt, again, sewing the side seams. And of course, once everything is sewn, I can bring it back over to the ironing board and go ahead and press all of my seams open that I just stitched. Of course, pressing as you go is basically essential for a nice finished product, and for many times for seams to go together smoothly, and for the process to go together smoothly, I suppose. But also it means that when you're done with your garment, it is all nicely pressed and ready to wear, which is also nice. As I'm pressing open the side seams for this, I will go ahead and press back the seam allowance of the rest of that opening for these sleeve seams as well, for like the sleeve hems, I guess, and I will just hand stitch those down later. But because I'm pressing open the side seam, that 1/2 inch, I'll just press back the rest of that cut edge a 1/2 inch. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And with the bodice all assembled and the facing all assembled, I can go ahead and finish the neckline on this buddy, pinning right sides together, my facing and the bodice here. And I will go ahead and just draw on where I need to turn the corners with some washable marker on this facing. Again, it won't be seen anyhow, and I just like to know exactly where I need to turn these points to make the geometry of this whole thing really sharp. And sadly, I somehow have lost the clip, or somehow didn't get one of me actually sewing that. But remember, I just leave the needle down at the point, bring the presser foot up, turn the project to the new angle I need, put the presser foot back down, and keep sewing. That's how I get around corners and these sharp angles that I often do for necklines. But I can now go ahead and press that seam allowance towards the facing itself, and I'll go ahead and understitch this as much as I can. Of course, around these little points down in the center of the neckline, it would be really a nightmare to try and understitch that. You might be able to do it by hand. No idea. I just didn't bother because I have faith in the cotton to stick to the interfacing and stay where I want it. But for the back of this neckline, I just went ahead and threw some understitching in here since I could. And for that, I'm using the narrow side of my presser foot as a guide and just stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line on the facing side with the seam allowance all underneath the facing. And seeing as I've already clipped my corners and curves and etc., I can go ahead and flip that facing to the inside and give everything a nice press and get everything to lay nice and smooth in here. You often see me use a knitting needle to help poke out my corners here. Try and be gentle, especially with a loosely woven fabric. You will poke that knitting needle right through the corner if you're not careful, so a subtle touch can be needed. And with that, my neckline is finished and my skirt is all put together, my bodice is all put together, so I can go ahead and put my skirt and my bodice together once again for the second time today. Earlier I did a peplum against a waist seam, and now I am adding a skirt against a waist seam. Same process, just, the length of the skirt is either skirt length or peplum length. I've never made a skirt that's quite short. I don't believe in a short skirt on me. Proportionally, I just like a longer than knee length skirt on myself. It's not that I hate my knees or anything. It's all just about proportions and like the overall effect from like far away. I care more about silhouette than detail, which is hilarious because we all know I love to like sit and embroider bugs on stuff for like weeks on end. So I love detail. But when it comes to, I don't know, the main broad strokes style lines, it's about like, what does something look like from 25 feet away? Not necessarily what it looks like from 25 inches away. So I like proportionally longer skirts on myself. And like the high neckline thing, sometimes people mistake that for modesty, which no, it's just more room for brooches usually and goes better with the style of bra I wear. It's not necessarily a modesty choice. It's more of a stylistic choice again, or like a silhouette choice, I guess. If that makes any sense, trying to explain my weird preferences that of course only apply to me, and I don't think about these things when it comes to other people at all. But I've pressed open my waist seam. I can line up the center backs of my dress right sides together, and determine how long my zipper is going to be past my waist seam here, so that I can go ahead and sew from below where the zipper will end down towards the hem. And I will leave about 8 inches open down there at the hem just for a bit of a slit to help with walking in this pencil skirt. Although this is not a narrowed pencil skirt, it's not like a pegged skirt, it is just my straight cut basic block skirt. Not even narrowed a little bit, just a straight skirt from my hips down. And again, this being a lighter weight cotton, I will go ahead and interface the last 1.5 inches on either side of the center back opening here before I set my zipper in here. I will be doing a lapped zipper today, as is per usual. A center back lapped zipper from me, I know. It is shocking, and I will be going through the process with you here, but I do have a video all about why and how I do my lapped zippers, so if you'd like an individual video all about the process, you can find that here on the channel as well. And I always leave myself 1 inch of seam allowance at my center back on my patterns, just so I have a little bit more working room back here to keep things nice and smooth when putting zippers in. And once I have the lower portion of the skirt together, I will use that 1 inch as a guide, using my hem gauge as well, just to press back the rest of the opening to that same 1 inch. And once the back opening, the edges are all pressed nice and smooth, I can go ahead and set my zipper in here. I position the right hand side of the garment right next to the zipper teeth. This will be the side that gets overlapped and is technically hidden under the barest overlapping edge of the other side. So this gets pinned right next to the zipper teeth, and I'll take it over to the machine where I have switched to a zipper foot, of course. And I'll slide the project in here and get real close to the teeth here. Of course, you don't want to actually like sew on the zipper teeth itself, otherwise you will have the bummer experience of having the zipper be potentially ruined and definitely have to be re-sewn, and a lot of unpicking to be done. So, you know, you want to be real close, just catching the folded edge of the fabric here and stitching it down to the zipper tape right next to the zipper teeth, but be careful not to sew over them. That's why a good zipper foot is your friend in these instances. And at the end of this, I try and move the zipper pull out of the way just to get the last 1 inch or so, and the zipper pull was being really stuck on me and took forever to get out of the way. Come on, buddy. There we go. And with that right hand side of the zipper sewn down, I can go ahead and take this all back over to the ironing board and just position this so that it is slightly overlapped. People always ask me if I adjust my pattern for the amount of like loss in this. No, we're overlapping it less than 1/8 of an inch. So it's just covering the other side. So it's not like overlapped enough to affect the fit in any way. When I say overlapped, I mean overlapped the slightest touch, not a ton here. And I switched to the other side of my zipper foot and can stitch that down. Again, the zipper foot is riding against the zipper teeth. It's just underneath the folded edge of the fabric, but I can feel where that ridge of the zipper is and run my zipper foot along that all the way up to the top. So my center back zipper is in, and I can go ahead and fold down my facings. Give these a quick press in here so they will lay flat and cover the top of my zipper here. I will also put in a hook and eye at the top of the zipper as well. I often skipped that step earlier in my sewing, so sometimes I try on dresses that are from many years ago and I go, oh, there's no hook and eye at the top of this. Of course, I could always just add one, but you know, lazy then, lazy now, you know. And if I have to trim my zippers, as you can see, they're made of nylon, so I just melt the end of those with a lighter I have down here, just so that they do not ever unravel on me, even though they're rather encased anyhow. And again, I just have that edge of my sleeves turned in that 1/2 inch. I'll just throw a couple of pins in there so I can hand stitch that. And then all I have left to do on this dress is to finish the hem. And again, I'm just using a little bit of that green coordinating bias tape that I had laying around here to finish off the hem on this one. I could have just turned this twice, but I figured since I hemmed the peplum this way, it would be a nice finish to use on the dress as well. So that gets sewn right sides together to the outside and then folded and pressed onto the inside, and then I will hand hem this down. And here is my finished, simple summer dress in this lovely cotton batik. Unsurprisingly, I've paired this today with dark green, but of course I could wear this with black and many other colors, pulling those out of the print. And here is the dress with the matching top worn over it to give it a little bit of a different look. Higher neckline, of course, with this, and then the peplum as well. Do let me know if you think I can get away with peplums. I still am not quite 100% sure about how I feel about them, so I guess I need an outside opinion to validate whether or not I like peplums on me, because I'm just Not sure. Despite these projects being on the simpler side, I hope you still enjoyed seeing how they came together today. I do promise I have something a little bit more complex coming for you next week. And thank you as always for watching today. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!